tonight we're going to be exploring the Egret Rookery of Shorebird Way. And it was called that before it was a rookery. You can question the literacy of the birds, but either way, it's a great name for the location. So as we go into the rookery, I just want to orient you guys in case you have never been or just need a reminder. So the Shorebird Egret Rookery is located on Shorebird Way in Mountain View. It is in the middle of the Google campus. So there's a little bit of walking. The nearest really accessible public parking, unless you're parking in the Google lots, is going to be on Crittenden. But it's a great part of a walk if you're going along Stevens Creek or if you're visiting Shoreline. It's a great hour-long stop if you want to take some pictures or if you just want to be absolutely surrounded by birds. Walking to the rookery is a really fantastic nature walk, despite the fact that you're going through a tech campus. There's a ton of native plants, which actually help support the other wildlife that's found moving through the rookery. So not just the egrets, but it's part of what's responsible for the butterflies. So you'll usually see monarchs, you'll see swallowtails, like this guy here, flitting around. There's a ton of bees visiting the poppies, and occasionally you'll see the lizards, although they tend to stay away from the rookery because they are fair game to the egrets, and no bird is going to turn down an easy meal. But once you get to the rookery, you kind of hit this wall of sound. And what's neat about egrets is they don't have the complex vocal cords that our songbirds have. So when we listen to them, you're hearing this chuffing, almost barking sound. The snowy egrets sound like they're gargling. And all of this together is kind of doesn't really match up with the appearance of an egret or a heron, which is this really graceful, pretty bird that makes absolutely ridiculous noises. So what is a rookery? So a rookery is just a communal nesting ground, in this case for egrets and rooks. Egrets and herons. The term was actually coined from the nesting habits of rooks themselves, but we use it for really any communal nesting bird. There's safety in numbers. The nesting habits of a bird tend to be pretty secretive. And part of that has to do with their life cycle. Birds come out of eggs. And so there's a 2-week to almost a month-long period of every bird's life where they can't move, and they are basically nature's best meal ever. It's high in fat, it's high in protein, and it's stuck in one place. So bird nests either have to be really well hidden, they have to be almost inaccessible, or they have to be defended by the parents. And so the benefits of a rookery is that there's always going to be somebody around keeping an eye out for predators. And on top of that, the egrets and the herons on the rookery at Shorebird Way are nesting pretty high up in sycamores. They're a good 20 feet up in the air, which protects them very effectively from any ground-based threats. And when you're looking at numbers around anywhere from 40 nests to over 100 nests, that means there's always going to be at least 1 or 2 fully grown adult egrets or herons that are keeping an eye out for anything from a crow or even a hawk that might come by and see about snagging an easy meal. Now, these are the nests we're talking about. They're bunches of sticks, for one. Egrets aren't super great when it comes to nest construction. We actually see this quite a bit when we have years where there's heavy windstorms during the nesting season. Sometimes the nests just fall apart. So they're constantly adding more sticks to them. They're constantly looking for more sticks to add, which gives us a really great behavior to look for. But inside of these nests are these really great blue eggs. They're about the size of a chicken egg, but they're all this lovely, almost robin's egg blue. And you can find the shells all over in the grass, in the gutters, in the middle of the street. So it's a nice thing to keep an eye out for as the nesting season moves on. And I mentioned the sticks. So one of our favorite things to do in the egrets office hours is to just watch the egrets look for sticks. It's mostly the males that are doing this behavior. The females are the ones that will add the sticks to the nest. And you can always tell when he's brought back a disappointing stick because she just chucks it. So we do advise visitors to the rookery to keep an eye out from above. You never know if you're going to be right next to a falling stick or part of an egret baby's lunch that was brought back and it didn't quite measure up, or, you know, anything else that may come from birds. Now, when we're moving through the rookery itself, it's a good idea to know when it's most active. There's about a 3-month period where the activity is really high. So while we do see egrets and herons starting to arrive in April, your best bet for finding activity is between May and July. There's always a couple of stragglers that are hanging on in August, but to be honest, there's not a ton of them. And at that point, the rookery smells like it's been hosting a bunch of fish-eating birds for several months. So I don't recommend visiting in August. Cut off your visits around July. You'll still see babies. You'll still hear a lot of activity. It doesn't smell as bad. It's not a consideration we usually talk about, but it's worth mentioning if you're planning a trip out in there. Now, the Egret Rookery has been monitored for great egrets starting in 2005, so that gives them 16 years of residency. In 2008, we saw the snowy egrets arrive, and then in 2017, we got black-crowned night herons, which was really exciting, and we've been watching how they interact and sort of move closer and further away from the rest of the egrets. In 2019, we saw the black-crowned night herons kind of take over their own little corner of one of the Google parking lots. And the entire collection of parking stalls underneath those trees was completely whitewashed. So they do put out signs of warnings if you're going to park near the rookery. Don't leave your convertibles top down. Now, the birds themselves. Obviously, we have to start out with the egrets. So this is our snowy egret. We can identify these guys by their bright yellow feet, which they'll use as they walk through the shallows of the waters to stir up fish and bug life and sediment. And then they've got a black bill, which sets them apart. And here's a closer view of this guy. You can see their plumes, which these guys grow during the breeding season. These plumes were actually really, really desired by milliners, hat makers in the early 19th century, and to the point where these guys were actually almost hunted to extinction, in part because they grow them in the breeding season. And they're communal nesters, which means you only have to send one hunting party out to get a whole collection of feathers for your most fashionable hats. Unfortunately, that has a really fast effect on the population numbers of the birds when you're culling them right when they're reproducing. And the snowy egrets, as they're breeding and trying to attract a mate, you'll notice that the skin between their eyes and their beaks turns bright red. Now, this doesn't last very long. Once they've laid eggs and they're feeding young, you'll notice that that skin turns back to the bright yellow that we usually see the rest of the year. But there's that short window where they've got some really fantastic coloration going on. The great egret obviously is going to be quite a bit bigger. This guy stands at around 3 feet. He's got a 5-foot wingspan, but they've got black feet and they've got a yellow bill, which is a little bit more helpful than just the sizes if you're considering the differences between snowy egrets and great egrets, because sometimes comparing those sizes is a little bit tricky. And compared to the snowy egrets, red coloration on their face, the great egrets go with green. So that's another difference to keep an eye out for, but just like the snowy egrets, it doesn't last for very long. So I wouldn't rely on it as a field marker for any length of time. And like the snowy egrets, they grow these fantastic plumes, totally useless for flight, great for attracting another egret. And we've got to mention our night herons. So the black-crowned night herons are a largely nocturnal bird. You'll see them a lot in the Charleston Slough area next to Shoreline Lake. They like to hide in the reeds, and during the daytime, they're pretty still. They don't want to be up, they don't want to be awake. But if you go on nighttime walks, either in the slough area or if you've got a neighborhood park, odds are pretty good you guys are going to see these birds poking around, either on the edges of the water or even in the middle of a park's field, digging up bugs and worms. And they've got these fantastic red eyes. Now, this year, we've actually got white-tailed kites nesting right next to the rookery. They've got a very loud baby right now. These are really striking raptors. They're white, they've got bright red eyes. And frankly, they're absolutely gorgeous. We see them hovering over the marshes in the kiting behavior that was named after the birds. And these are also a bird that's been renamed more times than I want to count. So if you call it something different, that's totally fair. It's probably going to change within 5 years again anyway. The black phoebe is one of our favorites. When we're birding in the county, there's a small running joke that you haven't really been birding unless you've been able to add a black phoebe to your list. That holds true for the rookery. These little guys are flycatchers, so they're predators of their own right. They really love to find a perch in which they're going to keep an eye out for any flying insects, and they'll swoop down to grab it. And on top of that, they actually nest right next to the rookery. You can see their nests, which are little mud shelves clinging to the sides of the buildings, usually right next to the windows. So we always get to keep an eye out for these little guys. And then we've also got bluebirds. So we've got mature trees in this area, which is always great habitat, particularly if there are woodpeckers in the area for our bluebirds because they're cavity nesters. But we also have a couple of active nest boxes that the bluebirds make use of right next to the rookery. So you can get more nesting birds than just the egrets and the herons with a visit there. And these little guys are, of course, absolutely adorable with some great colors on them. And walking through the pathways, you're also probably going to scare up some dark-eyed juncos. These little sparrows are really tiny. They like to stick close to the ground, but as they're flying away, you'll see flashes of black and white that are really great at catching the eye, even if you didn't quite see them when they were just rummaging around in the leaf litter. Now, I want to show you guys some babies. Now, that's kind of the reason we go to the rookery. Baby birds are delightfully awkward dinosaur muppets. They make weird noises. They are insufficiently covered in feathers. So you get these weird skin gaps. They just look super scruffy and they are completely ill-proportioned. So these are great egret chicks. Look at those faces. They have googly eyes. It's ridiculous. Their entire face is beak. Doesn't get better with a different angle. But this is kind of the opportunity to really see birds as the dinosaurs. They show it best when they're babies. The black-crowned night herons, now these are older chicks. I can assure you they look just as scruffy when they're about a week younger than this. But it's interesting because the black-crowned night heron, rather than being that really crisp black and white and gray that we saw with the adult, they're striped, which means they've got some great camouflage when it comes time to move away from the nest and start hanging out in the reeds and the trees during the daytime. They blend in really, really well. And of course, they also get to be awkward. And the snowy egrets. We actually see snowy egrets coming out of the egg with dark bills as well as yellow bills. They can be born out of the same nest, which does get a little bit confusing when we're looking at the great egret chicks, which also have yellow bills. But you can see that these beaks are a little bit finer. They don't quite encompass the entire face of the bird the way that the great egret's beak does. And when they're stretching like this, you really get a chance to see the wing structure before all of the coverts, those small feathers that basically smooth down the line of the wing grow in. In this one, you can actually see how the feathers are actually growing directly out of the arm of the bird, which is pretty cool. So what are these birds eating? Pretty much anything. They are predators, and with feeding time with the rookery, it tends to get a little aggressive. Everybody has knives attached to their faces, which really kind of begs the question as to how nobody loses an eye. But the parents seem to be pretty under control with this whole situation. When we're getting a look at it when it's slowed down, it doesn't really get less alarming. There's less jerking and squabbling in the background, but as you can see, everybody's really up close and personal, and the babies are always hungry. Now, both parents are going to be involved in feeding these babies, which is good because there can be anywhere from 3 to 5 chicks in the nest of a snowy egret. That's a lot of mouths to feed, especially when you're considering they have to hunt for their food. These birds are going after fish. They're going after frogs. We've seen evidence of crayfish being brought back to the nest for the babies to eat. We get to see lizards being eaten. And you've probably actually seen an egret or a heron in the grass hunting for rodents, which are also fair game for the babies as well. We had one year where we got to watch a bullfrog be fed to a baby, and it spent a good 5 minutes trying to swallow the thing, and then it promptly took a nap. So we continued to watch the nest to make sure that the baby came up for air afterwards. And you get to see the chicks squabbling amongst each other after feeding. Now, these little guys are absolutely awkward. This is a really cool time in a bird's life where you can actually see the feather tracks. So normally we get these adult birds and they're all sleek and clean, and you think, oh, every inch of them is covered with feathers. It's actually in stripes down their bodies. So while the feathers themselves overlap really nice and neat, not every inch of their skin is covered in those feathers. And we get to see an example of some of the food that they're bringing back. So some very large fish, even some lizards, although you're not going to see great blue herons at this rookery. At least you need to go a little bit further afield for these guys. So what is being done to protect this rookery? Because it is a really important place. We get a ton of egrets nesting here. Back in 2018, it was home to about 20% of the South Bay's population of egrets coming in to nest to raise their young. So one of these things is habitat management. This is in the middle of a tech campus. And obviously there are certain standards of care that are to be expected. But during the nesting season, there is no mowing that's allowed underneath these trees. So you tend to see a gigantic amount of growth from the grass and the plants all around. This means that there's a ton of space for these birds to hide in if they're able to. Didn't work out so well for this great egret chick. But it also means that it's a nice soft landing. We do see baby egrets fall from the nest. And once they've left the nest, whether it was intentional or not, the parents don't feed them anymore. They consider their hands washed of the whole thing. So that soft landing doesn't do these birds any harm. And the lack of activity underneath those trees means that they're experiencing less disturbance and less stress as both the parents are trying to feed their young and as the young are actually growing. We also get road closures. So this is a baby snowy egret on top of one of the road closure signs that the city of Mountain View puts out. This is really important. It means we don't have to worry about any of these babies on the ground being struck by cars. It means that there's, once again, less activity going underneath the rookery. And it also means that birders and people who want to go visit the rookery can stand in the middle of the street without worrying about being hit by a car. You still get the cyclists coming through, but they tend to give better warning when they're coming up behind you. And of course, we've got the plants. So there's been a ton of work with native plantings in the area surrounding the rookery. That means that not only is there a ton of insect life for our other wildlife to feed on, but it also just kind of adds to the rookery itself. It's a really gorgeous place to go and visit. You're seeing a ton of flowers. You're getting butterflies, as I mentioned. You're getting other birds that are visiting to hunt those bugs that are brought in by the native flowers. And it just makes for a really fantastic place to visit, not just for the birds themselves, but to just spend some time in and enjoy. Now, I want to thank Google for sponsoring Egret office hours. We literally couldn't do it without them. And